welcome back to another episode of Backseat Designers Season V. I am Gareth Millward, and I'm here, as always, with my lovely co-host Frederick Olsen.
Hello.
And Trolls Plymouth.
Hello.
And we have had the most interesting discussion before we've come onto air that will not be shared here but might be shared on the Patreon account. We're here today with Konstantinos Dimopoulos, who is an urban planner by trade and has translated these skills into the world of adventure games. So welcome, Konstantinos.
Oh, lovely to be here. Thank you. Alex, do excuse the pronunciation, please. Do that. It's like got a weird accent, but
yeah. Oh, and we don't.
I mean, if you've ever listened to this show, then you know my girlfriend listened to my English, and you know the looks I get.
The subtitle of this podcast is basically 3 different accents. If you can understand any one of them, you will have a bad time. Thank you.
Well, I mean, more like 4 different ones, given the gentleman that has joined us on the soundboard, that you may get to hear a few words from later on.
Gareth, you sort of... Yeah, you skimmed over... We had an interesting discussion, but never mind that. Let's turn our gaze towards...
Well, it is the Ides of March. And
exactly. And speaking of the Ides of March, Sic Semper Tyrannis.
Sic Semper Tyrannis.
Well,
this is exactly what tyrants will get.
Yeah.
It too.
Eventually.
Eventually. Yeah, after we die, of course.
Yes. Not in our lifetime.
No.
As the English host here, my job is to steal anything marble that you might have and put it in my museums. But I'm sure you don't have any of that stuff. I wanted to start by just saying that I had absolutely no idea who you were, and so I went to your website. And I was...
Oh, thank you. You're like my today's visitor. Thank you. You're my unique visitor. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And I really enjoyed some of the stuff that you were talking about.
You are now subscribed to the newsletter.
I am. I'll subscribe to any newsletters you have. Because you can obviously expand on this, but basically you understand how cities work and have worked, and want to bring the fullness of cities to video game narrative design. Exactly.
That's the gist of what I'm trying to do, and have been trying to do for the past 4 years. Yeah, I think it's 4 years, more or less. That's exactly it. Actually, it's more of combining, like the science and academic work with video game work, and trying to say where that leads. It seems to be interesting so far.
So you started out with being a city planner, and then you, I'm guessing you had an interest in games to begin with, and you kind of thought, I can combine these 2 things.
Exactly. And the thing is, actually, after 2010 and the collapse of Greek universities, I sort of went into gaming almost full-time. And, we had a little company. We made a few games for mobile devices, shamefully. And then it sort of occurred to me that, I could combine the science with the fun stuff and do probably interesting things. I don't know. We'll have to wait to see that.
I love your title of game urbanist. I think that is a fantastic title. Now, if can we just, for the layperson, for anyone who's never tried to draw a city map or anything, just briefly explain what that would entail? Because you go to your website and there are some very lovely, colorful drawings of what I assume are cities from a bird's eye view, but also very lovely rendered and very meticulously planned out. And I don't know if you've ever been to a Danish city like Copenhagen, which is basically someone just dropped a bunch of brick buildings on top of the water and just waited for them to rust.
Well, to be honest, I quite like Copenhagen.
Thank you.
Thank you. We don't.
I'm quite fond of Copenhagen.
Are you really? Okay, fine. I'll be the minority.
I mean, it does have its moments and sensible considerations, which is a nice thing.
Well, Copenhagen is interesting because, and this is, might be a good thing to talk about actually. Copenhagen is interesting because there are so many different schools of architecture represented. Like you can walk around and you'll be going by some old buildings, and then suddenly you'll find yourself in the presence of some newfangled modernist architecture.
Exactly.
There are all these kinds of layers, and this is how cities often work. You don't design it from the beginning and have like a clean environment, not unless it's something planned out like Milton Keynes in the UK or something. You just pile more shit on. you just pile more shit on top.
It's exactly what happens in reality, and it's something that could happen, like more organically, as in say most of Europe, or it could happen like really brutally with the destruction of everything existing, as it happened in Greece, say, for example.
Right.
Where if you visited Athens, the lack of older buildings is beyond notable. It's like everything that's older than 60 or 70 years old, it's like adored nowadays, because like, oh look, this survived being built up and sold.
Right.
So yes, Copenhagen is a bit of an architectural museum, if you could say that.
And that also comes from, decades and decades of different architectural styles cropping up, and then all of a sudden someone plonks down this big reflective black diamond in the middle of everything. By the way, if you've never been to Copenhagen, this episode just got off to a weird start. But yeah, it's a hodgepodge of different things, and that's what cities are. So when you're when you're designing a cityscape for a game, let's just gradually move into that frame. You don't just, I would imagine, you don't just sit down and go, all right, this is the style, and then off you go.
No, exactly. It's exactly the opposite. What I'm trying to usually what I'm doing is like either consulting and helping along the process of designing the place. So what I'm actually trying to do is convince people that things do intermingle, and you have like all sorts of style like next to each other, and there's like historical layers of things, and this is what makes things believable and sensible. And my best example is obviously City 17 from Half-Life 2. It's amazing. You've got everything from Baroque buildings to early Soviet brutalist modernism to, then postmodern stuff, and then all the way to alien architecture and things. And all those coexist, and they do not feel out of place because this is how cities are built. You have people, and people are not like super rational, and they do not think like planners. Like
exactly.
This is like
That's
very
putting it mildly.
You see, like planners have this like weird obsession that you can plan the wrongs of society out of it. They really do believe that if you really design something in the best possible way, problems will get fixed. So what do we have here? Poverty. Okay, so let's make sure that poor people are next to rich people. So this thing will it will do nothing. It will just confuse people and bring tensions forth. So planning as a science has its problems, and has had them for like even since Le Corbusier and the modernists. They thought that they could demolish the past and just design something nice on top. Which is you don't really get to do that.
So you mentioned Half-Life 2. Again, just for the layperson, do you have some examples of like really brilliant city design or even world design in games that we could use as a starting off point for the discussion? Like your favorite examples of the thing that you do done well in games.
Oh, I would say definitely Half-Life 2, probably Dishonored, because they have managed to understand that it's not just architecture and things that a city is like beyond that. It's much more. It's like, so it's the economy and this whole whale-based oil thing and how all the technology is built around that, and you have class divisions and political tensions, and they make something that's like, it feels real. Or I don't know,
One that I love personally, if I may interject, was
sure.
Assassin's Creed 2. And I mentioned this before we started doing the episode. And I don't know if I'm correct here, but I read somewhere that the reconstruction of Florence in Assassin's Creed 2 is very historically accurate.
I don't think so that you know that.
Why, thank you. No, actually, I don't. I'm kind of asking.
Well, to be honest, I haven't played Assassin's Creed 2, but I do love Florence. And
I was just going to say, is anyone going to name a game I've played?
Well,
yes, actually, I would say Gabriel Knight. Like Gabriel Knight, even though it's been created by people who haven't been in New Orleans, which is interesting, because, I mean, Jane Jensen did actually admit to that. It's the fact that it's based and doesn't try to interpret just, it reconstructs what is there. It feels real. It feels like... it
feels like a real city. It feels like a place that's lived in.
Exactly. It makes sense. It makes sense on all the levels you'd want it to make sense.
It's obviously a small cutout of New Orleans, but that's probably mostly because of technical constraints. But yeah, I agree. I mean, some of the, especially a place like St. Louis Cemetery really comes to life and really adds to the atmosphere and to the story.
But also, same thing that happens with New Orleans is like what Dave Gilbert does with his New York, and it's because he knows the city and he understands how it works and he gets what's interesting in it. He doesn't feel the need to show you, like 2 or 3 major landmarks and then say, okay, that's that. But he shows you a part of the Central Park that's interesting, or something that makes sense and something that's not banal enough to put people off, but just feels believable and real.
Because in the constraints of a game world, you also, unless you're building like a sandbox environment, you also want to keep it quite streamlined. You want to show the places of interest to the player, especially in an adventure game, story-driven game. You want to show the bits that are interesting, where the plot is going to happen, and then make sure. I'm speculating, of course. Make sure that the rest of the world is sort of you can glimpse it in the background. But it's not, it's not sort of coming at you like forcefully. Take a completely fictional city setting, like my favorite game, Beneath the Steel Sky.
Exactly. Yes.
Which is just one city that consists entirely of like 3 or 4 screens per level. Like the city is divided into top floor, middle floor, and ground floor. But you're given the sense that it is the sprawling metropolis. You're just locked off into this tiny little, compartmentalized part of the city. But it does.
Absolutely.
You have the sense of this gigantic city that's all around you.
And it's also using a very effective trope. Like, you said Metropolis, and I would argue that it's heavily inspired by Fritz Lang's Metropolis, where the rich people live in these so-called eternal gardens on top, and you go down through the layers, and down underneath the city, underground, is the worker city, where all the people that make this machine run are stashed away, basically.
Yeah, basically, Beneath the Steel Sky just stole it. They just flipped it around, so all the poor people live on top.
Yeah, and they added a bit of Paranoia XP RPG to it, because you have like this supercomputer. But the thing is that you don't have to show everything. You don't have to model everything. It's so easy to imply things, like to do things via dialogue, or like a zoomed out shot. And because people are like mostly experienced urban dwellers or citizens or whatever, they do know how cities work. So that's something you can use, and you can understand that someone will instantly understand what it is you're implying. If you show them like 15 skyscrapers in the background, they know that, this is a dense big city where things are happening. What sort of things? I think I can imagine what they are. And if you reinforce that with your dialogue and a couple like well-selected backgrounds and scenes, that's usually enough. And usually people fail at that for some reason. I don't know why.
No, I like Beneath the Steel Sky just has 1 or 2 like big establishing shots, like in the intro when the helicopter goes down, and that's basically all you see of the entire city. And then from then on, it's really like zoomed in. You only have these screens to move about, but there's always like in the background, sort of faded out, there's all these buildings. And I imagine if they had the technology back in 1994, you would have seen like helicopters zooming by and traffic and all of this stuff just happening in the background.
I think even in other media, it's something that's kind of begun to fail. I mean, Star Wars in the world of movies is a great example because that's really the lived-in sci-fi universe. In the original trilogy, everything is dinged up and dirty. It's been used for decades before. Sure. Move over to the prequels, and I realize they take place before, but everything is squeaky clean, mostly because 90% of it is shat out of a computer. But it really changes the quality to the worse.
But no, the truth is that if Jonas Kiradis heard you butt-mouthing the prequels, he would be really upset because he does appreciate the political thinking behind them. But it makes sense.
I'm sorry. Who would be upset? Because I really want to have someone be upset at Fred.
Oh, Jonas. 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 The sea will claim everything and Talos principle.
Yeah.
Oh,
seriously, I mean, he really appreciates the political intrigue and plot of the prequels.
Yeah, well, I mean,
admittedly, it makes sense, but it's just so incredibly, amazingly dull.
Very, very heavy-handed and dull. No, actually, I'm lying. We mentioned porn earlier, and I actually jack off to Trade Federation disputes.
What?
Don't we all? But no, we don't. No, we don't.
So as you've been saying then about these cities that help to you get a kind of an immersion without needing to create every single 3D model of every single building. How do you go about planning chaos? Because if real cities are chaotic, how do you go about making a chaotic and believable environment?
Well, you see, the thing is that real cities seem chaotic to the average person, like walking from one place to another or driving from one place to another. But when you look at the statistical image, they're not. You can very, very well anticipate when traffic is going to happen, where it's going to happen, and which places will flourish and which will not. Now, those are like rules. So if you create, for example, in an open world setting, if you create the rules that, say, mimic or adapt to some sort of economic and social reality, what the player will look at will be seemingly chaotic, but also on a subconscious, say, level makes sense because it will feel real. Like you will see people going to their jobs during rush hour while pensioners just take their walk, and while kids, scream trying to avoid school, and while teenagers actually skip school. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it just like in an instance, it doesn't make any sense at all. But if you model it, and you can model it, I mean, you can actually model it pretty decently in real life, you can come to an approximation that feels real enough to convince players and immerse them into something that looks chaotic, but is not random. It looks chaotic in a sensible way. That makes sense.
So in terms of gaming, we've already had your favorite examples. I suppose we could steer this into the territory of games that don't quite live up to the mark, so that we can get into a sort of discussion of how you would go about actually doing it right.
Sounds like there are more horror stories than success stories, actually.
Yeah, more than just fixing bikes. Now, do you have any examples of games where you can just kind of see what they were going for, but they sort of missed the mark in terms of making it more immersive and more real feeling?
Well, I think that like in Mass Effect 2, the Citadel City, which could have been super amazing and like awe-inspiring and everything, and instead it felt like like two stingy rooms filled with like 5 characters, whereas it should have been like a huge metropolis in space. There were things they could have done, even via dialogue, or trying to avoid showing those empty spaces, it sort of failed. Or
yeah, I agree. I've played all 3 of the original games. I haven't played Andromeda yet, and by all accounts, I shouldn't.
I think you should.
But I mean, the Citadel was pretty good in the first game. It was pretty
in the first
big,
game,
actually.
It was way better. But the thing is that the first game I played was Mass Effect 2, and then I went back and played Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3. But when I first ran into the Citadel in Mass Effect 2, it felt too small, too constrained, too like. And now you just go down these stairs, and this is the ghetto, and right next to it, we have the ambassador's place. Oh no.
Yeah.
Or, like the standard thing where they do, and they tell you we're like in this huge whatever city, and you will have to go to the butchers. And there's like one butcher. See, come on, this wouldn't stand
the
anywhere.
butchers.
Yes, it's so incredibly simplistic, and all you need is like 3 more words. It's like, instead of the butcher, say you have to go to John, who's the best butcher in this area, and that's it. You save that.
Yeah, all of a sudden you have familiarity in a cityscape. Like, it's not just the butcher, the ubiquitous butcher. It is this person who is
a butcher.
The one and only butcher in the entire galaxy. Another horror story is from the first Mass Effect game, and I don't know how many of these side quests you've played, but you very, very quickly notice that every single military base that you go to in every side quest is exactly the same. I mean, maybe the textures are slightly different, and I get that from a space constraint point of view, but why the fuck would you include so many side quests if they're, architecturally one and the same all the way through? It really diminishes the value of them, I think.
Yeah, I think that this must have been a weird choice. I don't know. Maybe sometimes I think it's just padding. It's just thinking that the longer a game lasts, the better it is.
Yeah,
I can't find any other plausible explanation for this.
Yeah, because I mean, it's such a shame, because you've got a game like Arkham City that comes along a while later and just blows it completely out of the water, in my opinion, at least.
True.
I think.
Okay, but admittedly, Batman games, despite featuring Batman, are actually good. I cannot understand why people are attracted to other people who have like tiny ears on top of their heads. It's sort of
as a person who's not terribly fond of superheroes myself, I can only applaud that. I mean, I kind of like Batman, but that's only because of childhood nostalgic feelings towards the first Michael Keaton movies. Honestly, anything after the Michelle Pfeiffer getting her ass kicked in latex suit, I'm kind of over it.
Yes.
I just wanted Danny DeVito to bite someone's ear off, and then I'm fine.
Heathens. And to think Julius Caesar died for this.
Which is the item mark.
You like it.
No, seriously. I mean, this is my major problem with Netflix. You have all those weirdly clad adult humans in your face. I don't know. I think it's as if everyone is being treated as a 5-year-old. Like, look, he's got a tail. Look, she's got I don't know.
There's a lot of spandex going around.
Yes,
well,
yes.
I do think the world of supermarket movies has been saturated, and it'll probably happen to games as well. But I mean, for my money, I like the Batman games, but I'm also a pretty big Batman fan. He's the one superhero I never tire of. But you go to the cinema these days, and it's basically like Stan Lee puked all over the place. It's nothing but capes and tights.
Yeah, that's
getting old pretty quickly.
You should definitely avoid American cinema.
Yeah,
it's not good for you.
Let's steer this in and we'll probably get back to examples of things done right or wrong. But I just wanted to take a quick detour into the question of believability versus functionality, because one game that showed up in me little brain while this discussion was going on was games that depict huge sprawling locations that are not necessarily realistic, but they add to the gameplay. And the example I was thinking of was another favorite game of mine, namely Carmageddon. which
Ooh,
has a gigantic, like you start out in a gigantic sprawling city. Nothing in this city actually works.
No.
They just plonked a football stadium down in the middle with huge open gates, and the entire purpose of that is, of course, so you can storm through it in a big car and mow down everyone. So what are your feelings on, how believable do you have to make it, or how functional do you have to make it in terms of gameplay? Where's the balance?
I would say that necessarily, since this is the medium, you have to put gameplay first. And then it depends. I mean, when you're going for Carmageddon, where I just realized that I've never thought of Carmageddon's levels as being set in a city. It's just like it's just there. It's
right.
It's a lovely place through which you run and kill things and ram into things, and that's that. So when you go for something like super cartoony, I wouldn't say you have to really bother yourself with that. Whereas if you go for something like, I don't know, Mafia or GTA or whatever, you have to really put some thought into that. So in one case, the city is just a background. It's just a silly thing that's happening alongside everything else that's actually pretty silly and pretty fun. So really doesn't matter. Whereas if you try to go for the more realistic, more immersive and serious, and you have to feel things and understand what the characters are going through things, well, in that case you have to be slightly more careful.
Right. I mean, there's not a lot of plot going on in Carmageddon, I'll give you that.
Admittedly, not so much. Whereas, I mean, the standard example of bad cities and bad settlements are in RPGs. It's especially the older ones, especially the third-person isometric ones, where you go to the medieval village, and instead of finding 15 hammocks and a church, you find 5 weapon dealers and inn and 2 houses, and you say, no, this is really wrong.
Yeah, and the blacksmith has set up shop deep down in a monster cave somewhere. It's like, where's this guy's customers come from?
It's pointless. And you try to understand, I mean, does that actually serve the gameplay in some way? Not really. It doesn't, because you'll just have to grind yourself and then get the guns and then go down the dungeon. They do that thing, and there are certain... There's a game I was working on, and you had it was supposed to be a city, and it's like the city. This is like the downtown dense area, and next to it is the airport, and then we have some open fields, and then we have a suburb, and then another built-up area. And so, this is so wrong. And, even if people don't instinctively or immediately get what's wrong exactly, the combination of little mistakes adds up, and after a point, you don't really believe that this is a real place. This doesn't make sense.
You know what? That's actually that was my reaction when I played the first GTA 3. Back when that was the only game that the game that was just advanced enough that my computer could run it, and then everything that came out after Vice City and such, I've never actually really played because couldn't run it. Anyway, off track already into that sentence. The first GTA 3, you've got a city that's supposed to be lived in and believable, and yes, it is divided into the sort of rich part of town, poor part of town, and then there's a fucking airport just bang slap in the middle of it.
Isn't it odd? I mean, it's old for all of us because we know where airports are.
Yeah, they're way off in the distance somewhere.
Especially Stansted.
but if
which is it's a good thing you had to go to Gatwick a couple of years ago, Trolls, and not Stansted, because you would still be there.
If you're trying to tell an immersive story, that's kind of part of the point, isn't it? You need to drive somebody to the airport. Everybody knows that that's an onerous task.
Exactly. It's because, I mean, and the more time that passes by, the more urbanist humanity becomes. I mean, we are very experienced as a species in getting how cities work. We know that. We just know that because, 3 out of 5 of us live in cities and know where things are and know how things are supposed to be, and know that, for example, the main difference between a city dweller and someone from a village is someone in a city knows that they'll have to deal with strangers every day. You go to the bank and there's a stranger there, and then you go to, buy some cigarettes, which I've quit. But yeah,
Good on you.
And there's like the strangers selling you those cigarettes. Whereas if you go in a village, people start asking you like, "Oh, and where are you from? And whose are you?" Which is something we do in Greece. Like, whose? Like whose? I'm nobody's. Like no.
Like who let you out?
Exactly. I mean, who is responsible for you? Who is like your great grandfather? It's like, no, I'm just visiting. It's like it's a very different mentality, though. It's
Jesus, I thought Australians were familiar. Like, I remember going into a video store when I visited Australia back in the late '90s, and the guy I was with, he just started conversing with the clerk. Hi, how you doing? Oh, we're doing pretty good. We're gonna have a barbecue later. Oh, cool. That sounds pretty cool. You gonna watch some videos? Yeah, that sounds pretty good. And when we got out of the store, it was like, oh, how long have you known this guy? Never met him. It's like, oh, okay.
Okay.
That's one level of familiarity. But apparently, like you said, in Greece, if you go in and you go, who's your dad? It's like, whoa, Jesus.
It's especially intimidating to a Dane, and people will know we are more than a bit timid.
And it's also intimidates someone who's from Athens, and you go to some place and they start asking you, and you try to smile and say, oh, yeah, I really don't know anyone. No, thank you. I don't need one.
I just came for cigarettes. I don't care.
I'll just take those and leave.
Well, I think a game that got this kind of scale thing wrong actually were the early Police Quest games, where they're meant to be set in this kind of small city.
They got a lot of
seems to be
stuff
about
wrong.
But it's meant to have what, about
did
sort of
use
5,000
the
people.
Police Quest 1. Sorry.
These places, it's meant to have like about 5,000 people, but it has the drug problems of a major metropolis, and it's just
Yes. Actually, a Police Quest 1 has been an example of mine on cities done bad for ages. It's like it's so wrong. They get. But I do believe that this is the deranged perspective the average police officer has of everyday life. So this is mixes things up. Those people. I'm not saying they're inherently evil or something, but they do not understand like actual real people who do not enjoy being beaten up.
And also, my father-in-law, the ex-cop, will
oh god,
be joining us next week.
Oh shit! I'm seriously mortally afraid of. Yeah, in Greece, the past 10 years have been like really tense with the police.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I think you're facing different problems as to what we are here. I mean, we'll have the occasional news sensation or scandal rather, where a cop has been caught uttering a racial slur, which is bad enough. But I mean, you go down to the southern parts of Europe. Like I was vacationing in Barcelona last year,
the Spanish
and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what was going on. This was like a month or so before there was a terrorist attack down there, but I saw these cops wielding automatic rifles, and I'm like, is this where I do a prank or something?
No, I'm certain this was not the case.
Is this where I get to do my Virginia Capers impression?
Would you direct me to the nearest drug dealer?
What?
Yes, I'm thinking. Well, in Greece, you wouldn't have a problem with that. They'll probably sell you anything.
Well, I was just thinking, I do have a fear of authority and a fear of police officers, but I think that's just because
if authority took a look at you, they would be more fearful of you.
maybe that's why I got away, because it probably stems from the time I used to smoke a lot of weed, but then again, maybe that's why I got away with it. I don't know.
Yeah, because you're their customer, so they respect that.
The customer is always right.
Yes.
In Soviet Russia, weed smoked.
Those were the days.
So is anyone going to get us back on track?
Well,
yes,
I guess
we're talking about.
If this is the
Scale.
Ides of March episode, I can't wait for the 420 episode.
unbelievable scale.
So yeah, scale is a thing. Yes.
Cool.
Scale. Actually, I was recently looking at the map of the latest GTA, And if it was like a zoomed out bird's eye view map of the whole city, and if you compare it to the smallest of the world metropolis, I don't know, if you compare it to, I don't know, San Francisco, something that's like really small, it was tiny. It was tiny, and I can't help but feel that trying to recreate a whole city in an open world environment, it's still something that's not the best of ideas. You should try and cut places off. You should try and imply more and model less, because you cannot drive through a whole city in 15 minutes and call it a metropolis. It's fun, it's impressive, it's beautiful, it's all those things, but it's too tiny.
All right. So just to move this into, I mean, I'm going to try and poke the well-dressed bear here. And what is your opinion on procedurally generated worlds? Because that takes power away from you and meticulous planning and that sort of thing.
Not necessarily, I would say, because I mean, especially if you use like something that Houdini could come up with. Something like that looks nice from afar, but does not like hold up when really investigated. But if you use that as a background, that's pretty awesome. I mean, you can take your time and design the places and the areas where the player will spend most of their time. And if you have them driving across town through, I don't know, a highway or using the super fast, like railway system, you really don't have to put the time into those things. You just have to have the general rules, like this is the poor area, this is the dense area, this is the, I don't know, industrial area, and those are enough. Those variables are enough to create something passably convincing when you move by. So it can really help, and it can really make something of the scale that we'd like to. If we are trying to, I don't know, recreate Coruscant in the Star Wars universe, you wouldn't be able to model everything, but you would be able to procedurally create places and then just focus on the central square and the administrative buildings around it.
All right.
I mean, things can be combined together.
All right. I don't really have any other place to go with that. I just wanted to throw that in to see what you were going to say.
It's really interesting, though. I mean, and I've been talking with this lovely person who's been doing those medieval procedurally generated cities on Twitter and things. And you see, I mean, when you just go and change a couple of variables and make things like slightly smaller, slightly denser, or less organized, it's amazing what you can come up with. It's I mean, the procedural thing is really a lifesaver, and even if you want to really, really pay attention and make everything by hand, you could start with a vague procedurally generated thing and then just modify it. It will save you a lot of time.
Yes, that was actually what I was going for. If you like, is there like a fast cheat, like you get the AI to sort of design this massive thing and then you go in and tweak it so that it becomes a conscious design based on randomness?
Yes,
rather
exactly.
than
I think this is a way forward. I mean, if you want to do something really big and really convincingly big, you can have like a seed, and obviously you should pay attention to the rules and really research them and try a couple seeds and stuff. But if you have something to start from, it's way easier to fix that and modify that than, because the thing is that say there was this studio I was working with, and they made those wonderful experiments, and they had people make levels in like in gray blocks and have people wander around them, and then have real cities remade with gray blocks and have people wander around them, and people could tell the difference, and they couldn't exactly say why those things were different. But the thing is that in a real city, everything that's in there has been put there for a reason. It's got a purpose for being there. Even if that purpose is like personal or stupid or like unfair or whatever, it's been there and it makes sense in a certain context. It's not just there randomly.
Right.
So when you just go and throw things around, they don't make sense. When you throw things around with certain rules, they do make sense. And when you fix them a bit, they make sense enough to convince someone that this is a real place.
Right.
Yeah.
So the I think I would like some grounding, some ground rules. Let me tell you a quick anecdote. Very recently, Fred and I and Gareth and I and all of us really were involved in trying to get a game off the ground that we will not mention because we might still get there. And it involved drawing a map of a small town in Southern California, a fictional town that we would invent for sort of a beachside kind of town. And I sort of just drew this overhead map and started out with the important locations, the locations that were important to the plot, and it made the rounds in the dev team. And suddenly someone piped up and said, "You know what? Where's the school? Where's the firehouse? Where are all these buildings that sort of have to be there to make the city run?" And I was like,
Functional
I didn't
public
think.
services.
Yeah, where's all of that? So what are the ground rules for constructing a fictional city? What do you have to have in there?
So I would say there are like two sets of rules. Like the first set would have to be determining what a city does. Like, why do we have a city? Why do we just live dispersed in the woods? So those are the functions. So what does a city have to do? It will have to provide shelter. It will have to provide water and security and food and commerce, economy, whatever. It's like there's a set of functions that each city has to fulfill. And that's one thing. And then there's the structure of the city, like where is the dense center? What does that center do? And what do we have around the center? Do we have like, suburbs? Do we have industrial suburbs? So if you combine those things, if you combine functions and structure, you have a very good idea of how things are and how things should be. And you usually do not forget central stuff like infrastructure or utilities or services such as the fire brigade and the police, because when you start thinking about what do we have to do, what does the city have to do, it will have to be able to reproduce its population. So we need hospitals, we need schools, and we need houses, and we need food and water and safety. And what does safety entail? Police and fire brigade. So it's sort of
mafia
a method.
headquarters. Sorry.
Obviously, because people do need their drugs and stuff.
Yeah, sure.
But, I mean,
have you been looking in our design document? No, I'm just kidding.
No, shockingly not. But I mean, no. The thing is that I was at some point I spent like half an hour helping Francisco with his overhead map for the Lamplight City.
Yeah.
And there were like I don't remember exactly which things. There were like 2 or 3 things that were like so obvious, and he fixed so quickly, and instantly this map made so much more sense.
All right, he put the drug bin next to the police station, and that just makes no sense.
Exactly.
Well, it does if the police are druggies.
Or lots of sense. Yeah, it depends.
Or the donut shop, really, really far away from the police station.
It's the last place they'll look.
Sorry.
But the thing is that, I mean, the main thing is that if you think about functions, you sort of gradually get to everything that needs to be there. So like, where does waste go? Where do people drink water? And those things usually, I mean, we've been discussing with a friend like that some of the best cities ever are the cities in the third Witcher. They're amazing.
Can I ask you a question in that vein? Because I'm kind of thinking of, this goes for most types of fictions. You will rarely read or see or play through a scene of your character going to the toilet, for instance. But it's something we all do. I'm told even women do it. But
there's only one bathroom on the Starship Enterprise.
Yeah, that's exactly my question. Where does the limit go? Because no one wants to see James Bond have a bout with diarrhea.
See,
I do.
It's exploding! Moneypenny, get more paper!
God, no.
No, but you see, this is the thing that you don't actually have to see someone go, and you don't have to see someone like use the toilet, but
Well, I mean, it was, you know, despite your, you may have opinions about me from listening to this show, but despite my other inclinations, I didn't mean to fixate it on toilets. It was mainly a case of where does the line go if you want to advance the story? Like, what would you leave out of your city planning?
I would say it depends. I mean, you do not have to show everything. It's like, even if you imagine that, let's say Gabriel Knight, for example, was in a fictional city. If it were in a fictional city, it would have like all sorts of problems because people would have to like imagine. So, what would the city lamps look like? Where would the dustbins be? Everything. The fact that you're basing it on a real city, and you take a photo, and this photo encompasses everything, every function, everything that happens in this place is in this photo, and you can see it, even if you don't understand it. That makes the place feel realistic. So, but if you try to design it from scratch, you have to keep in mind that people do use toilets. Maybe I won't show them at all, but I'll keep that in mind when designing. So, and also there's gonna be people going to work, and there's gonna be people staying at home. There's gonna be sick people. There's gonna be hospitals and everything. And so, even if you make like a really rough sketch on this is gonna be my city, and this is here and this is there. So when I draw this one particular background, I know what to show in the background. And I know that if there's like this huge big bridge in the background, this means that this is a big city, big enough to afford a bridge to cross the river. This is something that doesn't have to be explicitly shown, but means that a certain thought has been poured into that, and these things make sense. Everything with each other makes sense, but in a really subtle way. So you don't have to show people going to the toilet, but if you show like 100 rooms, you could maybe show a door with a WC on it.
Right.
That would be enough to imply that, oh look, there is like everything. There's a toilet, and thus there's a plumbing system, and that the plumbing authority. You don't have to show it, but just keep it in mind. That's usually enough.
Oh, there is poo underneath this city in big canals.
Exactly.
That could be the subtitle for the game. Welcome to Assassin's Creed. There is poop underneath the city. Actually, I could. Oh, sorry. Did you want to wrap that one up? Because I got a question.
Please do.
No, you go ahead, Trolls. I was just going to ask something awful. So
well, I always love hearing from you. So if it's relevant to this question, because I'm going to switch gears slightly.
Okay, well, I'll go there, because one of the things that I was interested in, because as you've brought up the Ides of March and the assassination of Julius Caesar, how do you...
Never forget.
How much does history come into what you do? How in terms of either the evolution of a specific city that you're trying to tell a story in, or in trying to set a city in a particular time period?
Well, quite a bit, actually, because I do believe that, and this is true even in actual urban planning, every place has history. Now, in order to recreate that, you have to think in layers. So you say, so first there was like this, ancestral burial ground, which eventually turned into a temple where people used to worship like the heroic ancestor, and there were like 5 huts around it, and then the Romans came, and the Romans brought, the aqueducts and the baths and whatever. And if you think in layers, you can also decide what to keep from each previous layer. So say what we said in the beginning, like in City 17, you have all sorts of architecture, and they are laid out very sensibly. In the center, you'll find older buildings, but also the newest ones. Whereas in the outskirts, you will find like middle-aged buildings of this roughly Soviet-esque era that are crumbling. And all those things make sense. So evidently the people who designed City 17, they did think in layers. They did think that first this thing happened, and then that thing happened. And that's how they made it, like sensible and real. Or if you think, I don't know, there's this guy called, my French is horrible. I think he's called Gilles Tréhin. portray him. And he's done like this imaginary city in a book. It's called Urville, and it's just sketches of a city that never existed. And if you see, this guy starts by discussing the history of the place from the geology, and this thing happened, and that this mountain came here, and on that mountain people did that, and there was this mine, and due to the mine people came here and then moved to the river where they had a harbor. And you have to think historically, because every city that's ever happened had some sort of logical thought behind it. Someone decided to put it there because it was either defensible or next to good irrigation canals or whatever. There's always some sense of logic behind everything. So history does inform everything, even if it's imaginary. You have to think, so how did this thing start? Did the settlers came here? Yeah, good, they came here. So what did they do? They did the fort. Did the fort survive?
The city needs a character arc, just like any of your other characters.
Yes, actually yes. It should be. If you think, I don't know, if you watch the classic noir movies, like from the 30s, the city Los Angeles is actually a character. I mean, it's like it's imposing itself in every scene. It's this place that makes things happen.
Oh shit! Yeah, Blade Runner. I mean, come on, the city is the main character.
Exactly, and think how many old buildings one can see in Blade Runner. You can see that there are buildings from the 60s, and this is like the cyberpunk future. But it would feel totally wrong if you called it, first of all, Neo Los Angeles. That would be stupid. And then you would just have modern, super flashy buildings. No, you don't. You don't do that. I mean,
exactly.
Even Deckard is living in an old place.
Yeah, and that's where the Total Recall remake just went absolutely shit belly up, because they just did that, super futuristic Minority Report style kind of future city. Yeah. Like they just burnt the whole place to the ground and then thought, well, let's start again.
Yeah, see, that never happens, actually. I mean, it's silly. You have to have things from older periods, and you also have to think of how do people react to this. Like, I don't know, in 60s Greece, you would demolish it and try and make as much profit by building something really tall instead. Whereas, I don't know, same thing in nowadays Greece, you would have to protect it because you're bound by law to do so. So everything has social relations around it and a history behind it. So even if it's like in the simplest manner, if you just keep that in mind, you can make things that feel pretty much real, because people, when they're playing, they're really ready to believe that this is real. They're willing to believe that.
Well, that actually leads very nicely into a question I've been sitting on for a little while now, because you were talking about that there's thought behind everything. Like there's if someone built something, there was consideration behind that, and I would of course not imply that I have any sort of professionalism or horse in that race, but the cynic in me is telling me that sometimes people build things because they're idiots and because they don't understand. So how do you work that into city planning when you're building a game? Obviously, at some point, someone must have plonked down a building not because it made sense, but because they were wealthy and they did not understand. How do you intentionally plan failures into your cities?
I think that it's a bit like writing literature. So let's say, if you have my character is like really evil and stupid, so what would he do? It's the same thing here. Like, let's have something really weird. Who on earth would have done that? Good, like this sort of type. It would have been like the crazy, evil, cackling, capitalist bad guy. Good. So what would he build? Oh, he would build like this huge mansion, in the middle of the poor district.
Yeah, it's like that Monty Python sketch. Well, that sank into the swamp. So now I'll build the second one. And that sank into the swamp as well.
Exactly. So this is it. I mean, if you try and think that everything there was a motive, no matter how stupid or weird or whatever, if you manage to massage this motive into something plausible,
Massage.
Well, you could do that. I mean, think of, I don't know, what's this hated church called in Montmartre?
Scientology?
Good one, though.
It was a guess.
No. It's Sacré-Cœur.
Oh, Sacré-Cœur and
my old enemy.
We got a live one in here.
If you think, why was it built there? How crazy is that? And then you read the history behind it. It's like it's really crazy, and it's just there to piss people off.
Well, the French are really, really good at that.
No, I mean, actually, it was put there to remind the poor that they were butchered twice in the 19th century, and look what we did on your hallowed ground. We built this thing which reflects the ideology of this super secret cult of the Sacré-Cœur, which is only of super hardcore royalists, and you'll look at it every day. And if you think about it, that's super crazy. It's super unexpected. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Still, there's a reason behind it. It's political.
Same goes for Baroque stuff. Going back to France again, the Castle of Versailles. I mean, man taming nature. Right, so we've got an unlimited budget. We've got a decade. We're gonna fuck this shit up.
We're gonna make a tropical forest in France because why not?
Exactly.
See, it doesn't make any sense to us. But it did have an internal sense of sense. So you will. I mean, after a while, after doing the wide strokes, and you want to flesh things out, you could definitely do things, and you could probably get away with a lot of weird things that would feel, correctly out of place. Okay, this is weird, but this is not weird wrong. This is weird in an eccentric way, so we can get that.
I also had some follow-up questions about just sort of scaling it down and talking about even interior architecture or just house architecture stuff. I get the feeling we're kind of running out of time, Professor Millwood.
Well, running out of town was a good one.
We're running out of town. Yeah, actually, that was a bit of an unintentional second language thing that just happened there.
Well, for the second time in as many weeks, I'm not a professor.
Well, it's a thing now.
But that whole thing about internal design is about world building and about making it credible, presumably.
Yeah, and also in because I was specifically thinking about when we were brainstorming this before the episode. I was going to talk about games that have a single piece of architecture as its main focus, things like The Seventh Guest and What Remains of Edith Finch and stuff like that, where you have these seemingly impossible bits of architecture, but
the 11th hour in which the house is a rapist.
Oh yeah, how do you go about constructing an actual rapist house?
They do have those things.
Yeah.
Shit.
You should not play the 11th hour. It is a shit show.
I think you like it.
Just briefly, do you have I know you're an urbanist. Do you have experience with single architecture design?
Well, I know a lot of architects. I mean, usually we do work a lot with architects, and we also study occasionally with architects. And it's more of an antagonistic relationship. It's it's very weird, especially architects that do not have urban planning training. They're very difficult to talk to because they tend to think of the city as an extended house, let's say,
right,
which is so incredibly wrong on every possible level.
Yeah, because it makes when I recently played What Remains of Edith Finch, and
I've installed it. That's how far I've got.
Oh, okay. Well,
the first thing. Spoil it.
No, I'm not going to spoil. I'm just going to say the first time you see the house, which is in the first 5 minutes of it, it's like a normal house, but then someone just went in and started adding layers on top of it, on top of it, on top of it, and you just go, that looks structurally unsound. That looks like it's about to fall apart any minute. Why doesn't it fall apart? And you just go, either someone is really mad, or this would actually work, and I just don't understand architecture.
Yeah, there's no way they got planning permission for that.
Yeah, the question though is, does that put you off while playing it?
No, it doesn't. It just fills it with a lot more mystique, and I guess that's what they were going for. They just go, what's happening up in that tower up there, and why did they put it there?
Where are the supporting beams?
Yeah, exactly.
What they did is actually, apart. I'm not certain as to what they did because I haven't played it, but there's also the thing that, okay, generally speaking, we want things to make sense and be recognizable and whatever, and all our exoticism to make sense too. But sometimes you can really, really subvert what people have learned to understand. So everyone also has like a fundamental understanding of how things do not fall down.
Mm-hmm.
They know that statics, they might not understand the math, but they know that, okay, this thing would need at least something more than a single beam to hold it there.
Yeah.
So if you do something that's like so profoundly strange, it will just make them think. So same thing if you make like this wonderfully huge and vibrant metropolis and you can't hear a sound.
Oh yeah, that would be creepy.
That would be creepy because you know that those places should be like, I don't know, filled with hundreds of sounds at every second. So I mean, you can subvert that, but you'll have only in the case you go for something like really specific. Probably in the Edith Finch thing, you go for this weird, surreal feeling of uncertainty. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's actually a very good point. The one thing that really fascinated me about like Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis was when you go to Atlantis at the end, and you try to make sense of this place that used to be like a bustling metropolis, and now it's all ruins. Now it's all falling to shit. But you just go, there must have been some sort of logic sense to the interconnectedness of these different rooms, and you just every time there's like a ruined place or like a ruined city, walking around that, like, for instance, like what's that thing called, the the Town of Light, that's the one where you're walking around, and it's an abandoned insane asylum in Italy, and everything's just gone to shit, everything's falling apart, but every once in a while, you know, the screen fades into what it used to be like when people were walking around, and so you just start hearing these ghostly voices of nurses and doctors and shit, and that, oh god, I love that.
Exactly.
Ruins are interesting. Just
ruins are always interesting because, and I think this is also an inherently human thing. Like, and the less ruined ruins are, the more understandable they are, they're even more, effective.
Absolutely.
It's different walking through Pompeii than walking, I don't know, through
Atlantis.
That would be difficult to do. That.
Well, yeah.
The truth is out there.
We kind of have to find it first.
Well, also, admittedly, Fate of
I hear it's in a book somewhere.
Yeah, it is in a book. It's a pretty silly reactionary book. Because
I just meant Plato's dialogue.
A
friend of Socrates.
Shut up, parrot.
And Socrates are our enemy too, but.
Well, talking about ruins that are falling apart, I think that's the end of this episode.
Yes. Thank you for saving us.
Konstantinos, that was really interesting. We should get you back on again because it sounds like we've got plenty more to talk to you about. And
thank you. I'd love to. And I'll try not to be too late.
No.
No problem.
Oh, that was fine.
Sorry about that.
And plenty of the things that we talked about today are covered in articles which are on your website. So do you want to let people know where they can find you on the big internet?
No.
Roll credits.
Did you have that had that miserable time here?
No, I love the time here. Actually, okay. I mean, I have this site. It's called GameCities.com, and it's got articles and everything. I'm not certain people who are not designing games or into games will really find them very interesting.
We did.
I did, yeah.
I mean, give them a choice.
That's lovely, and I'm also working on a book at some point. We'll see.
Oh wow!
We have one more than one of us is familiar with that.
And you're on Twitter as well at Gnomeslair. Is there a reason behind Gnomeslair?
Yes, there's. It's actually a pun in Greek because let me see. Gnomi is the opinion. And it also sounds exactly the same as the plural of gnomes. So we had this fanzine for RPGs and political stuff and random things inside it. And it was called The Gnomes, which also sounded like The Opinion. And from there on, it went to become like my first blog back in 2006, 5, 4,
3, 2, 1.
I was young back then. I don't know. And yeah, that's how it stuck, actually.
Nice. Always wondered about that. So thanks for clearing that up. Back to you, Professor.
No, we can also be found on the Twitters. We are at BS Designers. Backseatdesigners.com is where you can find all of the stuff. We'll put all the links to various social media accounts and websites and all that kind of stuff on there if you want to find out any more. We do have a Patreon. You can find out all the details of that through the website as well. And our Facebook is, well, just search for the Backseat Designers. That's it for this episode from us. So say goodbye, Fred.
Yes, no problem.
And say goodbye, Trolls.
He doesn't do anything.
And it's a goodbye from me too.
I think you like it.